Program support provided by the F. Price Kosman Memorial Trust, Entrust Bank trustee, bringing you the Kansas Wild Edge segments on Positively Kansas.
It's time for Positively Kansas. Coming up.
Despite its title as kind of a love letter to my adopted city, I think people in places that are good all the time are kind of boring.
And there's nothing boring about Wichita's early days. The city was a hotbed of mischief and mayhem, according to this man. We'll get a taste of what his research uncovered coming up. Also,
if I don't work out, I get grumpy, and if I go out the door and come back, I'm in a much better mood when I get back. So it does help you mentally. Physically, you're going to live longer.
we all know that every good Kansan has grit and moxie, and this guy keeps cranking it up the older he gets. Discover how he keeps his mojo going, outperforming men half his age. And meet this Kansan whose disability became a blessing as he proved that pictures do indeed speak louder than words. And in our Kansas Wild Edge report, Mike Blair welcomes this hungry group of springtime visitors who are busting a move as they journey across the continent. We'll have those stories and more. I'm Sierra Scott. A half hour of information and inspiration is coming your way. Positively Kansas starts right now. Wichita has had several nicknames throughout the years. Cowtown, Peerless Princess of the Plains, and the Air Capital. But at one time, people across the country had a less than flattering name for our city. Local writer uncovered several eye-opening details during an historical investigation, as Jim Grayway shows us.
Every city of any size has crime and shady business going on. Wichita is certainly no exception. But writer and historian Joe Stump says the situation now is nothing compared to the good old days.
Well, I think what made it so wild is Wichita was a frontier town at that time. It sounds strange, but Oklahoma at that point wasn't even a state.
Illicit gambling halls, opium dens, crooked cops. The city was a sea of decadence and violence, swarming with hoodlums and hookers.
Wichita had 100 or 1,000 times more violence and corruption than Dodge City ever saw.
Stump says Wichita earned a bad rep right out of the gate. In 1873, only 3 years after becoming a city, newspapers across the Midwest were referring to it as Wicked Wichita, and that was just the beginning.
What I discovered was that there's a pretty big misconception about what really was Wichita's history. I think most people think that Wichita had a very few years as a wild cow town that only lasted 3 or 4 years, and then almost all of that took place, quote, across the river in Delano. The truth is, the city itself of Wichita was pretty wide open for at least its first 50 years.
The biggest, fanciest house in town was a brothel located right downtown. The owner-operator was a madam who went by the name Dixie Lee. And
she operated very openly in the city out of a large mansion that sits right where the Garvey Center does today. And she was very well connected politically. She was occasionally arrested or fined by police, but she did operate for at least a decade down there and became so well connected politically that Wichita became known as Dixie Leeville.
Her story is both colorful and tragic, with twists and turns that make it a real page-turner. Also around the same time, Wichita was home to another shady character named Professor Henry Samuels,
who produced what was known as patent medicine back then.
Samuels got rich scamming millions of dollars out of sick Americans from coast to coast with his phony eye drops. Samuels hoodwinked people into believing his miracle medicine would cure anything from tired feet to terminal cancer. His so-called medicine turned out to be nothing but sugar and salt water.
He was one of the wealthiest businessmen in Wichita until the federal government finally sent him to prison.
Another crooked Wichitan was a notorious gangster named Eddie Adams. Adams robbed banks, trains, any place there was a lot of loot. A master of disguise and of escaping from prison, Clever Eddie, as they called him, based his crooked operation out of Wichita for 2 years. Then he was gunned down in a shootout with police in 1921.
As they did back then, they propped his body up in the city morgue, and somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000 people came by to view his dead body.
That is twice as many as showed up to view John Dillinger's body in Chicago when he bit the dust a few years later.
So I mean, this Eddie Adams out-Dillingered Dillinger.
Those are just a few of the stories in Stump's book, Wicked Wichita.
I really wanted people to be, number one, entertained, but also to realize that their hometown is not some boring place in the middle of nowhere. It had a really colorful, lively history. And to me, that just makes it a much more interesting place to live in.
So do you think we're more boring now or not?
Yeah, I think we're more boring now, sadly.
Although, if you think about it, that is probably a good thing. For Positively Kansas, I'm Jim Grayway.
The book covers the first 50 years of Wichita's wickedness. Stump is already working on a sequel that covers what came next. Now to a Wichita senior citizen who's working harder than ever, even though he's fully retired. 66-year-old Dale Bing is preparing for a competition so fierce it attracts the most elite athletes from around the world, many of whom are young enough to be Dale's kids. Anthony Powell has the inspiring story.
The Ironman World Championship in Kona, Hawaii. The beast of all beasts for triathletes. A 2.4-mile swim, a 112-mile bike ride, and don't forget the 26.2-mile run. A mind-boggling challenge for competitors of any age, let alone somebody in their 60s. Many miles from Hawaii, 66-year-old retired insurance executive Dale Bing is hitting it hard at his new office, the Northwest Wichita YMCA. Dale is one of the select 2,500 athletes who will be competing in the Hawaii Ironman Championship in October of 2019, when he will be 67. To be invited, he had to place in a qualifying triathlon, which he did in Tennessee. He rotates his workouts to make sure he's doing enough swimming, running, and biking. But no matter what he's doing, Hawaii is always on his mind.
Especially the swim. In fact, I still am apprehensive about the swim.
Dale tells us he did some running in junior high, but nothing much after that until he was around 47, when his son began training for a well-known Wichita event.
I started running actually about in 1998 when my son wanted to do the 2-mile river run. So I didn't know I could run that far, and it was kind of fun.
But as Dale likes to say, he doesn't compete just for fun. He's in it to win it. Over the years, his competitive spirit would lead him well beyond regular races to big-time marathons.
I've done Boston a couple of times. It's a great event. I've done New York City. It's a great event too. I've actually done 9 marathons.
After marathons, he started training for triathlons. To date, he's competed in 103 events, including 22 triathlons. At first, his family thought he was crazy, but they gradually came around.
They are kind of over the why now, because I've done it a long time. They just want me to do well and don't hurt yourself, you know.
While Dale isn't worried about hurting himself in Hawaii, he knows how tough it will be mentally. That's why he works equally hard on his psychological game.
When you train your body, you also have to train your mind, because that's a distance to where you have to really concentrate and just break it up in one piece at a time. And even when I'm running around my neighborhood right now, you know, I'm thinking about that finish line in Kona, Hawaii, because that's probably the greatest finish line in the world.
He admits, though, he's had his doubts here and there about the competition in Hawaii, recalling what he said to his wife when they watched it on TV.
I said, I have no business being there. And she said, don't you ever say that again.
With that kind of reassurance, Dale knows he'll be just fine.
One thing I love to do is when I wrap a gift is to
Another of Dale's fierce supporters is his local media personality sister, Bonnie Bing. Usually when people hear Dale's last name, they ask him if he's related to Bonnie. But lately, with the publicity Dale's been receiving, people have been asking Bonnie,
are you Dale Bing's sister? And I'm kind of liking that a little bit, I got to tell you.
A little turnabout.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Even though Dale is as competitive as anyone, most of all, he is passionate about the benefits of exercise. So whether it's his sister, other family, friends, or perfect strangers, Dale is always preaching the vital importance of working out.
If I don't work out, I get grumpy, you know, and if I go out the door and come back, I'm in a much better mood when I get back. So it does help you mentally. Physically, you're going to live longer.
When it comes to exercising, Dale Bing, of course, doesn't represent the norm. But perhaps by watching his story, you might have become a little bit more motivated to work out yourself. We sure hope so. I know that swimming is something that I've wanted to incorporate into my workout plan, and Dale has got me fired up to get into the pool. For Positively Kansas, I'm Anthony Powell.
Dale urges everyone who's beginning an exercise program to take it slowly, run a block, walk a block. He says the tendency is to overdo it and perhaps get injured, discouraged, and quit. Well, there's no quit in Dale. He promises to let us know how he does in Hawaii. A Wichita artist struggled to express himself despite a speech impediment, led him to discover a way to be heard without ever making a sound. Correspondent John Wright tells us how Anthony Dozier's artwork allows him not only to be heard, but seen as well.
It wasn't long before Anthony Dozier of Wichita learned he was a little different from the rest of his Ingalls Elementary School classmates.
It happened at a very early stage in my life. As a child, I had a severe case of a speech impediment, and I tried to find many ways to try to express myself or say certain words without getting hung up or be embarrassed in front of my peers, anger my teachers, parents, and things like that.
Anthony says he could visualize the class lessons, but his teachers thought he was daydreaming.
Teachers often would hit me or hit us for daydreaming, but we weren't daydreaming. Some of us had imaginations.
Growing up in the turbulent 60s culture provided a lot of inspiration that Anthony used as resources for his artwork.
I recall as a child attending Ingalls School that has since been raised. We went to the Wichita Art Association, and we saw paintings and things like that. And it impressed upon my mind that people created these things. But as I grew older, I found out that people were making a living creating things that they love to do.
Many years later, Anthony is paying it forward in his community.
We just finished some real nice exhibitions, one at the state capitol in Topeka, the first part of February. And also we just finished up art that touches the heart at Wichita State University.
Quiet, please.
By the year 2015, Serena Williams had won Wimbledon. Anthony decided to pay tribute to his favorite athlete, who was hitting serves of up to 125 miles per hour.
We created a piece from that, and it is 50% recyclable because the pieces that are coming down are tossed away aluminum.
Anthony says Serena's coach contacted him about the diamond-shaped piece, which was eventually sent overseas following all the postal rules from France and the United States.
France had that terrorist attack at that concert. The Postal Service went crazy and tore up everything. Her piece never got delivered to her, and Long story short, I never did recover the loss on it.
Anthony hopes someday he can communicate with her to let her know someday he can give her the piece so she can go ahead and get that record.
She hasn't broken the record. You can just say I'm Serena's good luck charm.
Anthony, a Newman University graduate and locally celebrated artist, says he must keep going forward because there's wonderful things ahead. He says this race is not for the faint of heart, but the one that endures and paces themselves. For Positively Kansas, I'm John Wright.
You can find Anthony Dozier's artwork in various shops and restaurants around Wichita, including his neighborhood barbershop. The Rotary Club of Wichita is one of the oldest of its kind in the world. But what you might not know is the significance of the group's involvement in shaping Wichita's history. That involvement has now been captured in a book put together by several Rotary members. Anthony Powell has the story.
This recent Rotary Club of Wichita meeting looked and sounded like any typical club gathering, but it was more of a history lesson, you might say. An hour-long look at the club's history and the role it has played in Wichita's history, showcased in a newly unveiled book. This is the Wichita Rotary Built.
It's not a chronological history of what Rotary is. It's real stories that show the power of our club.
Numerous club members worked years on the book, collecting thousands of pages of articles and images that make up its 55 pages. For starters, the Rotary Club of Wichita was founded in 1911 by Wichitan Harry Stanley, making it the 30th oldest Rotary club in the world.
So, our club's founder, Harry Stanley, many of you have heard the story, goes to an insurance convention in Chicago, hears about Rotary, comes back home on fire, determined Wichita needs and deserves this, invites 12 businessmen to meet, and they organize.
From there, the club would grow and grow. Today, it has over 400 members, making it one of the largest Rotary clubs in the world. In the beginning, though, Harry Stanley didn't seem to care about size.
I believe Harry's drive to bring Rotary to Wichita was part of a greater mission. A businessman's club, networking with other clubs in North America, could be key to Wichita becoming a metropolitan center.
In the late 20s, when Wichita's aircraft industry began to boom, Stanley and some other Rotarians flew south.
There was a national convention in Dallas, and they did a Rotary fly-in and took 10 or 15 planes there. And for more than 500 Rotarians, it was the first time they'd ever flown in an airplane.
The Great Wichita Rotary Fly-In of 1929, as it became known, is credited with getting Wichita known as the air capital of the world. And for the next several decades, the club would play a key role in the air capital's growth and notoriety. In 1937, it sponsored a flag design contest for the city. Artist Cecil McAllister's Native American Concept won, and today our flag remains one of the most popular city flags in the nation. Club members also played a significant role in lobbying the city to construct Century 2. And bringing a Boy Scout chapter to Wichita, along with so much more. Community involvement is a big reason why This is the Wichita Rotary Built was delayed for several years. Originally, it was supposed to be published in 2011, the club's centennial. But members got so busy with the Rotary Time Tower and Centennial Plaza project at 2nd and St. Francis, along with other projects, the book would not be published until 2019. Meanwhile, as Wichita has evolved, so has the club, most noticeably demographically. For so many years, it was comprised mostly of white men, but not anymore. Something the book also addresses.
We've worked very hard to reflect the people that Wichita looks like, from gender to skin color to age to ethnicity to just anything that makes us the diverse humans that we are.
In November of 2019, the Wichita Rotary Club turns 108 years old, but the club and its members show no signs of slowing down as they continue to work tirelessly to make Wichita the best city it can be. It's a dedication captured beautifully in this book, a book that is positively Kansas. For Positively Kansas, I'm Anthony Powell.
In an effort to expose as many Wichita area residents as possible to the book, the Rotary Club is providing copies to libraries throughout the metro. It's been said that dancing is the language of the soul, but if you're a Sandhill Crane, dancing is the language of love. It's how you get lucky and find a mate. Mike Blair captures it all on camera in this week's Kansas Wild Edge Report.
The journey is long, 3,000 miles or more, when Sandhill cranes leave South Texas and Mexico to head for their nesting grounds in the Northwest Territories. They fly about 30 miles per hour, soaring on thermals whenever they can to conserve energy. They usually fly 8 to 10 hours at a time before stopping to rest at their favorite high-energy food source, corn. And central Kansas has plenty of places where the birds can refuel. There's something to see with their large size, rusty caps, and loud rolling calls. But there's more. In between bites, they often bust some amazing moves. Nesting season lies just ahead, and it's courtship time. And that means crane dances, where young birds do their best to attract a mate. A field full of dancing Sandhill cranes is a special viewing treat. You can't call it elegant. In fact, the dancing birds seem to make things up as they go. Jumping, flapping, prancing forward and backwards. It's something between a running fight and a disco competition as males vie for the attention of unmated females. Suitors peck at each other and scratch with their feet, leaping high in the air to gain advantage. Feathers sometimes fly. But in the end, the winner gets the girl, often sealed when the pair stand together, raise their heads, and utter a duet of blasting calls. Once mated, they stay together for life. They sometimes exhibit stately, synchronized flight to display this bond. Courtship is continuous throughout spring migration, since plenty of youngsters keep the party going. In their excitement, young males often grab plant stalks and toss them high into the air as they dance. Potential couples bow and dip, chasing among congested birds. It can all look quite confusing, sometimes bordering on the ridiculous. But it's always entertaining, and it works just fine for them. Look for dancing Sandhill cranes in central Kansas crop fields during early March. Areas near Quivira National Wildlife Refuge and Cheyenne Bottoms are best, since large crane gatherings use these famous roosting sites. While there, you might be lucky enough to see these cranes' larger white cousins, the rare whooping cranes. Altogether, it's a spring birding spectacle you won't want to miss. I'm Mike Blair for Positively Kansas.
Well, we're definitely at a place on the Arkansas River that's very familiar. There are a lot of landmarks, but what a lot of people don't know is it didn't always look like this. No. My good friend Sarah J. Harmon put together a documentary that's got a title so long I can never remember the whole thing.
The title is For Your Amusement, the Wonderland Park on Ackerman Island.
I remember the For Your Amusement part.
Yeah, that's the one most people remember.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Talk about, because I got to see this amazing documentary. It's so fascinating. I mean, everybody was riveted. Talk about how you came up with the idea to do it.
It was actually an idea that me and a coworker had. We randomly Googled the picture online, and we were planning on coming together to make the documentary ourselves. Unfortunately, we both got laid off from the same job. That changed a lot of things. So after a while, she ended up moving back to Florida, where she's originally from, and I stayed here. But the idea had been marinating in my head for about a year. And finally, in October of 2017, I decided to just go ahead and do it.
Now, what did you learn from it? Because I just thought it was so fascinating. There's so much, I mean, it's hard to talk about the entire thing in the limited time that we have, but what are some of the high points that people would be surprised to know?
Well, one thing, actually just behind us, is Exploration Place. And through my research and versus a bunch of other people that I talked to, it was housed one of considered the longest roller coaster in the world at that time.
So cool.
It was called the Giant Thriller. And it had a lot of dips and turns, and it took up a good chunk of the island.
And what I thought was really interesting is its grand opening wasn't exactly the time of year you would think that they would want to do that.
Yeah, the park actually had two different openings. One was in November of 1905, and actually the amusement park was still under construction when they opened it. They wanted to get people in as stuff was being built. So at the time, you only had the roller coaster, which was a figure 8 at the time. It wasn't even a Giant Thriller yet. It was another roller coaster and a couple other rides. So you got to consider November biting winter. A bunch of people going down on roller coasters. I'm sure they all got sick. That's my guess. But I'm sure they had a good time though.
What were you hoping that people would take away from it? Because I love you have a lot of old pictures. You get to see kind of what, an illustration, what it looked like.
Yeah, that was the fun part, actually, just seeing the actual photos. But yeah, now more people are finding out about it, but it seems so obscure. You know, very few people knew this place existed, let alone an island in the Arkansas River at all. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I had no idea. It's so cool. If you get a chance to see this, trust me, this is worth seeing. We are plumb out of time for this show. Positively Kansas at kpts.org is the address if you have a story idea. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Sierra Scott. See you next time.
Program support provided by the F. Price Kosman Memorial Trust, Entrust Bank Trustee, bringing you the Kansas Wild Edge segments on Positively Kansas.